Minister, I would like to begin by asking you to please respond to the findings of the Farrelly Commission, the report into what has been usually termed the Grace case, and I suppose more importantly your next steps and what you plan to do in response. And I do want to say from the outset I appreciate a lot of this is HSE related and there are a lot of questions for them to answer, but also we are reminded that when Grace was failed in the first instance she was a child, and so obviously your role is there as well, Minister. Thank you.
The Commission of Investigation into certain matters relative to the Disability Service in South East and related matters, the Farrelly Commission, as you refer to it, is an independent statutory commission of investigation established in 2017 to investigate the care and protection of Grace, which is a pseudonym, as we're all aware, and others in a former foster home in the South East, which has been the subject of abuse allegations. It is important that at the heart of the report is the story of Grace, the pseudonym chosen to protect the identity and privacy of the young woman who lived with the foster family. As you're aware, the final substantive report on the first phase of the Farrelly Commission and the Commission's statement concerning Part X of its terms of reference was published on the 15th of April 2025. The Commission's statement on Part X conclusions indicates that there is an absence of information in the possession of the Commission identifying issues for further investigation with respect to matters to do with the role or conduct of public authorities in respect of 7 cases identified, akin to the type of concerns raised in respect of Grace, save for 2 cases where the role of public authorities has already been investigated and reported upon by the Commission. On the matter of the treatment of protected disclosures by whistleblowers, the Commission's statement on Part X, the Commission does not identify further information which would point to the merits of embarking on further investigation in relation to how the protected disclosures were treated or the treatment of those making protected disclosures. In that context, and on the advice of the Attorney-General and on the advice specifically of the Attorney-General, there is no basis for moving forward to a Phase 2 of the Commission of Investigation. However, it is important to take every precaution to ensure that the lessons from Grace's case are applied. In that respect, I intend to undertake an expert-driven, non-statutory safeguarding exercise to identify learnings from the Commission's findings to inform present-day safeguarding policies and practices. In this regard, my officials are actively seeking to identify an appropriate expert or experts in the field of safeguarding to carry out this exercise. The 7 people referenced in the Commission statement on Part X and or their representatives are being invited to participate in this exercise to share their lived experience if they so wish to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy.
Minister, thank you for your response. And I think what was really stark in relation to the response to this report once it was published, usually you would be shocked by such failure and such grave injustices, but really I think what we saw on the back of the report being published was more so widespread disbelief and I think disappointment in relation to what the report was all about. Obviously, it took a very long time to conclude the report, 8 years, and it has cost thousands, millions in fact, of taxpayers' money, and there is very much a feeling that the report hasn't answered key questions. And I suppose for us and for your role and your department, it is about care and protection, and I think that needs to bring us to today and the state care system that exists today, and what we can take from all of this to ensure that our state system of care works as well and as best as it can for the children that are in it.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And look, you are 100% right. There must be learnings from this. There must be learnings, and we're so conscious that this is the story of Grace and of others. And in that respect, I suppose it is important to point out that, you know, since the case first arose in terms of Grace, there have been a number of positive steps forward in terms of safeguarding. You know, the development of the Office of the Ombudsman for Children, the establishment of HICWA, the establishment also of TUSA, the Child and Family Agency, and of course the commencement of the Children's First Act. But you know, I think it's important, as I've already outlined, that we don't stop there, that we're constantly in the space of being proactive here. So in that respect, I'm very specifically, as I've mentioned to you, intent on ensuring that there will be an expert-driven non-statutory safeguarding exercise which will specifically identify the learnings from the Commission's findings. And as I've said, we're already in the place of seeking out an appropriate individual or individuals to conduct that work.
Thank you, and I appreciate the steps you've taken, Minister, and the work that will be undertaken on the back of this report specific to the case, and rightly so, and of course that needs to be done. But I also want to impress upon you the need to look at the care system today. We know the Children's Residential and Aftercare Voluntary Association have repeatedly called for a review of Ireland's care system. They have raised repeatedly the increase in unregistered and in uninspected for-profit providers that are in the care system today. We know the Child Law Project have raised issues in terms of the care system in Ireland, and we know that judges have at various points in time raised and actually voiced despair at the system that exists for care. So I think while it is of course so important that we see steps taken on the back of this report, I would also ask you, Minister, that we need to look at the care system today.
Minister, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Deputy. Again, look, to be fair, I do want to say that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, and indeed it should be everybody's business. And so in that respect, I am absolutely committed to working with the HSE and with TUSLA to ensure there is a focus on continually enhancing the approach to safeguarding across all services, every single service. And I think we're very conscious in terms of, you know, the obligations as individuals, whether we're working in the fields of education or sport or whatever, where we deal with young people. We're all mandated persons, and you know, there is a process that needs to be followed there as well. There is a body of work also underway in terms of, you know, adult safeguarding, which has also been raised. You know, the HSE has introduced a national policy for safeguarding vulnerable persons at risk of abuse. There's also been established by the HSE National Safeguarding Office and Safeguarding Protection Teams. And for the first time, the HSE has appointed a chief social worker, which is an important step forward. And specifically, an issue that has been raised around developing a new policy on adult safeguarding, that's underway by the Department of Health as well, and that should be coming before us shortly.
Now, Deputy Owen Kenny.
Minister, are you aware the National Childcare website does not list fees for childcare providers for the year 2021, the key year which fees are benchmarked against the core funding? Will your department rectify this as a matter of urgency? The Labour Party has submitted at least 4 parliamentary questions over the last year in which the Minister and previous Minister have failed to provide an answer to this.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I am aware that the Childcare Search on the Hive website does not currently contain fees listed for services for the programme year of 21-22. The portal was originally designed to contain information for a current programme year only. So in addition to services fees list, the following information is available on the portal. So that's the contact details for services, whether services are private, community or childminding services, services calendar, which provides details of services operating hours per week and operating the number of weeks per year, and whether the service offers early childhood care and education programme, the National Childcare Scheme, and if it is taking part in the core funding scheme. The portal was recently upgraded to provide fees lists for the previous programme year 23-24. There is currently no scope to provide historical fees lists on the portal in the short term owing to competing ICT demands. However, I do want to say officials of the department are working on an interim solution in order to make the 21-22 fees list available through the city and county childcare committees, and that's how they will be available in the short term, in the interim. The list of services that have been approved to increase their fees through the fee increases assessment process will also be published. I anticipate the fees list will be available through the network of childcare committees in the coming weeks. I know that's not what you've asked for, but it is the mechanism that's available to us in the interim. But in the meantime, as I've said also, parents can contact the Parent Support Centre by phone or by completing a contact form on the website to ask about year-on-year comparison of fees lists for their individual early learning and childcare service. Parents can also contact their local city, county childcare committees. Childcare committees support parents and guardians to understand their early learning and childcare options and keep an updated directory of early learning and childcare services in their local areas. They can also provide information and support indeed in relation to fees.
Deputy Kenny.
Gurr Magat, Minister. Minister, you will appreciate that the Labour Party has frequently asked you and the previous Minister in parliamentary questions, and parents have been told to either go to their local childcare committee for historic fees, or go to the National Childcare website, or to contact the NCS directly for the fees. Parents have already gone down those three routes, you see, to actually access it. In response to a parliamentary question from my party leader, Ivana Bacik, on the 29th of September 2024, it states that the department will endeavour to have these fees publicly available as soon as possible. So a time frame on the short term and long term would be gratefully appreciated. And as you will appreciate, Minister, there is no opportunity now for perhaps somebody who had a child in preschool when they were in 2021 to now understand when they're in now, is that childcare facility actually charging more or charging less? There's nothing to base it off of.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I do want to acknowledge the manner in which your party leader and indeed yourselves have followed this through. And look, what I can say to you is that the portal was recently upgraded, and it does include now, I suppose, fees lists for the previous programme year of 23-24. There is an issue, and there's no point in saying there isn't an issue in terms of the capacity of the Hive website at present to go further back. So to ameliorate that, or to make recompense for that, I can say that the officials are currently working on ensuring that the 21-22 fees list will be available. I'm told that it will be available in the coming weeks. That's the best commitment that I can give to you, but I'm very happy to revert and discuss it with you again in a few weeks if it's not made available to you. But that that is as it stands. Look, enormous money has gone into the whole area of childcare. There's no doubt about that. Almost just short of €1 billion into the whole core funding, and there has been significant improvement. And it is important that parents would have access to what the fees were at 21-22. And as I said, that will be available through the childcare committees.
Deputy Kenny.
Thanks, Minister. I appreciate that. If you could clarify, it would be great. So we do actually have the figures for 2021. Although the website perhaps mightn't be working to its full capacity because it's a brand new website, and as you said, it has been designed now for the current 23-24 price for childcare. Do we actually have the figures for childcare facilities of 2021? So, like, once the website does get fixed, is it an opportunity then? Are the figures right there just to be put up on the website, or are we still looking for the figures, or are the figures available to the department? Because, Minister, you will appreciate, as I said, that new parents entering the system are presented with a table of fees by the service provider without any context for whether those fees in fact match what was being charged in 2021.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And again, I can confirm to you that the officials are working on the solution to make it available, and that the fees list of 21-22 will be made available through the county and city childcare committees. I can also tell you that in addition to that, also published will be the list of services that have been approved to increase their fees through the fee increase assessment process. And again, I'm saying to you that it is the best estimate of the department currently that will be available in the coming weeks, and I am very happy to engage in relation to that with you. I know this is important data and information to parents. I know there's an absolute acknowledgement that considerable work has been achieved in this space, as I've said already. Significant money in terms of core funding this year alone, €331 million in terms of core core funding that will rise to €350 million specifically for core funding. And the purposes around core funding are to ensure that there are reduced costs for parents, but that there's also support for providers. So that information should be available in the coming weeks. Thanks, Deputy.
Minister, I'm looking at the figures in relation to unfilled positions within each CDNT in the state. Obviously, we had the workforce report from last October that has been since published. And I suppose the big question is, it's the numbers that were outstanding. As I say, at one time it was almost 530 positions. But even if those positions are filled, are we able to provide the service that is required through the CDNT system?
Thank you, Deputy. Children's Disability Network Team's workforce survey, as you said, was conducted on the 16th of October 2024. So this survey captured staffing levels across various disciplines and grades, providing a snapshot of the current workforce across the 93 CDNTs. And while this report only provides us with a snapshot in time, with recruitment having continued in the interim, it's the most comprehensive workforce report we have on CDNTs. So the report was published on the HSE website earlier this year, and it is available to download. It indicated a wide disparity in the number of vacant and unfilled positions across the country, with the highest number in the Dublin and South East region. That's 144 unfilled whole-time equivalents. The number of vacancies in Dublin and the North East region, 125 whole-time equivalents, and in the Dublin and Midlands region, 112 whole-time equivalents, also being high. There were 65 unfilled WTEs in the South West region, 56 in the West and North West region, and 26 in the Midwest region as of mid-October. So the HSE is currently using the data from this report to support focused recruitment and retention initiatives in the areas with the highest vacancy rates, taking learning and related actions from areas with lower levels of vacancies. So the HSE have also advised that a survey for another CDNT workforce report is being undertaken, and that they expect the data to be available for that in the coming months. It's also important to acknowledge the progress that has been made in recent years regarding CDNT recruitment. So the October data indicates that the CDNT workforce increased by 17% in 2024 when compared to the 2023 figure. This represents an additional 272 additional whole-time equivalent staff working across the CDNTs. And within those onboarded, the largest growth was in health and social care professionals, accounting for 204 of the 272 staff.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Murrico.
Look, we all welcome, obviously, increased recruitment, but the fact is, whatever the figure said, we've all been inundated with parents who cannot get assessments or who cannot get therapies for their children. We all know the issue. Look, we've all had an over and back in relation to the fact that school-based therapies could deal with some of this issue. But if we even look at the recruitment levels on the basis of how they happened from last year, we're probably talking it would take at least 2 years at the same speed of filling these gaps before we would have the entire workforce. And again, that's only on the basis of the numbers that are set out at the minute. And while I welcome that there is constantly going to be a need for these reports, what we need to see is that we have real movement in relation to this. And can the Minister give any sort of timeline in relation to when all those positions will be filled? And then beyond that, if those positions are filled, will we be able to provide the correct service in relation to assessments of need and in relation to the therapies for those children with autism and their parents?
Thank you, Deputy. So just most significantly to add that the CDNT vacancy rate has reduced from 29% in 2023 to 22%. That's a 7% reduction nationally. But you are quite correct in relation to recruitment, retention, and there's a lot of work happening in that space. So in order to achieve the staffing level improvements achieved in 2024 and to fill those vacancies, there is intensive domestic and international recruitment efforts across the HSE, Section 38, Section 39 organisations to recruit and to onboard staff. There's also recruitment efforts being bolstered by optimising access to applicant pools, so the opening up of HSE panels, HSE advertising streams and candidate pools, and also training places in higher education institutes where they've increased with the growth in clinical placements in Children's Disability Network teams. So that serves to improve the recruitment and of health and social care professionals into CDNT teams. Also, the HSE Career Hub has 38 plus registered applicants. I'll come back in.
Look, we all know the issues there are in relation to recruitment and retention, but we also know the absolute need that is out there and the abject failure that there has been for many years, and this continues at this point in time. And while I think everyone would welcome and would say that it's, beyond doubt we need to engage in domestic and international initiatives, that we should be looking at every sort of pipeline in relation to ensuring we can get as many highly trained, as I say, OTs, SLT, psychologists and all those that are required. And we make sure that we can deliver everything from the assessments, and while that even means at times we might need to look at the method by which we carry out assessments, but right through to make sure we had fit for purpose therapies. But there is a particular issue in relation to how we deliver this, and I am going to ask the question again: if we fill all these positions, will we be able to offer the service that we need to be able to offer on the basis of the need? And again, I think we need to get real in relation to school-based therapies. And has there been much engagement with the Minister for Education in relation to delivering something across the board that's fit for purpose?
Minister.
Thank you. I'll start the last part of your question there. And we're working on a national disability strategy, and that is going to be published before the summer recess. So there is a high level of engagement happening right across government with my cabinet colleagues, as with Minister Norma Foley, in relation to the Minister of Education, Minister for Health, Minister for Social Protection, Transport, because when we talk about disability, it affects absolutely every single government department, and the ambition will be high within that strategy. And that, I want to say that at the outset. Just to go back to recruitment and retention, that is only part of it, absolutely. You talked about therapists in schools, absolutely having them in our special schools and rolling it out to special classes and mainstream schools as part of the solution here. But we will need to be up the recruitment at a domestic level as well. But looking at other things, as I said, higher education, we have an extra 150 now therapists going through our third level system since last September. We're also looking at outreach to secondary schools, looking at other ways we can upskill people from other disciplines.
Deputy Aidan Farrell.
Minister, the Programme for Government outlines an ambitious plan to progressively reduce the cost of childcare to €200 per month, commits to a review and increase of core funding, reduce the administrative burden on providers, capital investment to build state-owned childcare facilities, and so much more. Minister, what steps have you taken to progress these actions, and can you outline what plans are currently in motion?
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. You are correct. The Government has made a significant commitment to improve accessibility, availability, affordability and the quality of early learning and childcare provision. Investment in early learning and childcare is now at an unprecedented level, with public funding exceeding €1.37 billion in 2025, clearly demonstrating the Government's commitment to this area. The Programme for Government provides the impetus now to go much further and to deliver much more high-quality early learning and childcare places at a cost that is affordable to families. I am committed to establishing a €200 per month per child cap on early learning and childcare costs for families within the lifetime of the Government. This work will build on the significant measures taken to date to improve affordability. The Early Childhood Care and Education Programme provides 2 years of preschool without charge and enjoys a participation rate of 96% each year. The National Childcare Scheme is now worth a minimum of €96.20 per child per week for 45 hours. This Government is also committed to providing capital investment to build or purchase state-owned early learning and childcare facilities to create additional capacity in areas where unmet need exists. This would mark a very substantial and significant shift in the policy direction as the Department has pursued thus far. A forward planning model is now in development, which will be central to the Department's plans to achieve the policy goals to build an affordable, high-quality, accessible early learning and childcare system with state-led facilities adding capacity. Officials are currently developing a mapping tool also using administrative data on schemes and population location to identify areas where supply and demand mismatches are greatest. A recent Ipsos poll also to parents will help inform future planning also. This will enable the state to step in where it is necessary. As the Deputy will appreciate, we are at the very earliest stages of the programme for government, but work is underway.
Thank you, Minister.
Minister, thank you for the reply. We in the Social Democrats, we believe that solving the problem and the systemic problems facing the childcare sector in Ireland won't happen by doing more of the same. We believe there's a triple threat facing the sector, and we can't really ignore that any longer. There's a dearth of places facing children and young people. There's a real capacity issue in many counties. There's also a lack of affordability for parents. And the third key piece is very much the compensation and benefits for a sector that are providing such a crucial component, a crucial role for our society. But what's happening actually is we're seeing a recruitment and retention crisis play out before our eyes. The Partnership for the Public Good acknowledged in 2021 that early years and childcare is a public good, yet we continue to rely solely on the private market to meet that public good. Minister, can you agree that the state cannot continue to rely solely on the private sector to address these problems?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And look, much of what you've said I agree with, in that it's much of government policy insofar as there are key elements to government policy, which is in the first instance to manage and to reduce costs for parents. That's a key anchor. And secondly, to ensure that there's sustainability of the service being provided by providers, that they are sustainable in moving forward, and also to increase provision of places, and to ensure that we have a workforce that are properly recompensed for the work they're doing in this area as well. So in terms of the affordability for parents, and I've referenced it earlier, significant funding by government has gone into, through core funding, has gone into ensuring that money is in place that will ensure that there's reduced costs for parents, almost €1 billion. Also, the National Childcare Scheme has undergone a number of enhancements, which includes the extension of universal subsidy to all children now under 15, 2 increases to the minimum.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah.
Deputy.
Look, and the scale of what you're proposing and what this government is proposing and what parents are demanding and what the sector deserve is really significant. I think to see that type of growth and investment requires strategic, cross-party thinking on this. And I wrote to you a couple of weeks ago proposing that we establish a special select time-bound committee called Poshta Care, where in similar role that we did with Sláinte Care, that we take an approach like that to spell out the vision for the future of childcare and early education in Ireland. I think there's real merit to that, Minister, with what's going on from the government side, but also I think cross-party ideas about it, and to have the opportunity to listen to the sector, to listen to the key stakeholders, and to report back as to what the future of childcare, certainly with regards to the public provision. I'd really call again, Minister, if there's an opportunity here for the implementation of a committee like this, I think we could really all see the benefits of that in the long run.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy. And look, I want to be clear, I'm very happy to engage with you in relation to this. I engage on an ongoing basis with the with stakeholders and whatever body of work needs to be done. And you're right, I think we're unanimous in our acknowledgement right across every sector here within this chamber that a job of work needs to be done and must continue to be done in the area of this sector. However, significant progress has been made, but more progress needs to be made. Specifically, for example, and you referenced it yourself in terms of ensuring that the workers who work in the area are appropriately remunerated. €45 million is ring-fenced for that purpose this year, to ensure that providers themselves can continue. €350 million will be made available to them through core funding in the next tranche of funding. And equally so, where there are gaps, that government steps in. It is a programme for government commitment, that government steps in and makes the provision of places being made available through state-run or whatever way they're going to be run. There's already a forward planning model up and running within the department, and a budgetary consideration around the €200 per month.
Yeah. And now I move to question 87, Deputy Claire Curran.
Cathaoirleach. Minister, I want to ask you for an update in relation to the ongoing talks in relation to pay, particularly around the 45 million announced in budget 2025 to be ring-fenced for pay for our early years educators. Thank you.
As the state is not the employer of staff in this sector, neither I nor the department can set pay or determine working conditions. The Joint Labour Committee is the formal mechanism established by which employer and employee representatives can negotiate minimum pay rates, which are set down in employment regulation orders. I acknowledge the Joint Labour Committee is independent. I absolutely acknowledge that. It is independent in its functions, and I do not have a role in its statutory negotiation process. However, outcomes from the Joint Labour Committee process are supported by Government through core funding, which in the programme year for 25-26 will increase to €350 million. An additional €45 million, as you've referenced, Deputy, has been ring-fenced to support employers meet the costs of further increases to the minimum rates of pay and is contingent on updated employment regulation orders. Core funding forms part of a significant state investment of €1.37 billion in funding under Budget 25 for early learning and childcare. I recently met with the Joint Labour Committee representatives to acknowledge the committee's important role and to outline the government's continued support for the sector as a whole, and as outlined in the programme for government for the Joint Labour Committee process. I outlined to representatives that government expects the funding secured, the 45 million, to support the cost of increased minimum pay rates, and that it will be used for the purpose for which it is given in any new employment regulation orders, and that the full amount would be utilised. Data available to the Department shows previous employment regulation orders do not absorb the available core funding signalled for staff pay and graduate leaders. The level of pay of staff in the sector does not reflect the value of their work for children, families, society and the economy. Therefore, it is vitally important that the committee engage in productive negotiations about ensuring the high level of investment being made through core funding for improved pay is maximised, and I look forward to the Joint Labour Committee negotiated outcomes.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Quinn.
Thank you, Minister. And this is an issue I have raised a number of times with you. I want to welcome the fact that you have met and engaged with the JLC, and indeed that you've gone further than that in asking them to utilise the 45 million, because it is absolutely key that we improve pay for our early years educators. We know that staff turnover in our early years sector is really high. I got a breakdown county by county. Some counties annually, the turnover from private providers is up on 54% in some counties. That is good early years educators leaving at the sector. It means more waiting lists for children trying to get places. It means more rooms closed in childcare facilities at a time when there is so much demand. If we do not get pay right for our early years educators, then we are not going to have the necessary number of childcare facilities that we desperately need. So I want to welcome your move in relation to that, and I suppose we should take the opportunity to call on them for the talks to conclude and for that full amount to be.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I do want to acknowledge that this is a personal interest of yours, and you have raised it many, many times. It is my absolute determination that €45 million has been made available, and it is my absolute wish that that 45 million is used fully, totally and wholly for the purpose for which it is given. And I would always say it, irrespective of whether I'm inside the House or outside, that if we do not have a workforce, and if they do not feel that they are appropriately remunerated and valued, well, then they will go elsewhere. And I think it's really, really important. That's obviously to the benefit of providers who are providing the service, it is to the benefit of parents, but most of all, it is to the benefit of the children who are in their care. So I am really, really clear around that 45 million and how I would like to see it being utilised. I'm equally clear that providers need resourcing, and as I've said, €350 million around core funding this year being made available. Work is also underway in terms of minimising the administrative burden that providers speak about. So there's a whole body of work underway.
Deputy Quinn.
Thank you. And Minister, I should also say that, and you will be aware that SIPTU are raising concerns just in relation to the fact that the talks have been ongoing now for a number of months, and they feel that there is a gap there in terms of the providers on one side of the table and those representing the early years educators and managers in our childcare settings. So it is really important, and I think it's good we've had the opportunity here this evening to again make that call and ask that the Joint Labour Committee complete their work and that 45 million is utilised, because we need it at a time when our early years educators are leaving the sector and we desperately need them. And again, I've given this example so many times because I do have little faith in the committee in terms of its establishment and relying on it for pay on an issue of such importance. We know the last pay increase, it was 65 cents. It took 15 months to negotiate for 65 cents. So I do have concerns in relation to the mechanism. And just lastly, Minister, the core funding which you've referenced, the review promising the programme for government, do you have any idea when that will come to pass?
Thanks very much, Deputy. And look, I want to be clear. I absolutely respect the independence of the Joint Labour Committee, and it is important that they would do their work and that they would have that independence. But again, I'm acknowledging that there is that 45 million available, and that it is my view that it should go to for the purpose of salaries. You've referenced, the previous EROs and what occurred there. I just want to acknowledge that in terms of the setting of the minimum rates of pay in the last two EROs was not a product of the Joint Labour Committee negotiation process, as it were. It was as a consequence of the Labour Court that actually set out that set the rate. And the Labour Court does not have to take into account the monies that is made available in terms of support to the sector. I also, want to be very clear that, whilst we're focusing here on the salary as well, there's a broader piece of work that has been done also in terms of the entire service.
Now we'll move to question 88, Deputy Cleary.
Thank you very much. And first of all, my question is to ask the Minister her views on the 45 million allocated under Budget 2025 to support further increases to the minimum rates of pay in the childcare sector, a measure which will ensure providers can continue and also improve the pay for staff of the childcare providers.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and appreciate the question. And I know you've engaged with me on an ongoing basis in relation to this. I do want to say, as I've said previously, the state is not the employer of staff in the sector, and neither I nor the department can set their pay or determine working conditions. However, the Joint Labour Committee is the formal mechanism established by which employer and employee representatives can negotiate minimum pay rates set down by in the employment regulation orders. I acknowledge the Joint Labour Committee, as I have said previously, is independent and wholly independent in its functions, and I do not have a role in its statutory negotiation process. However, outcomes from the Joint Labour Committee process are supported by Government through core funding, which in the programme year of 25-26 will increase to €350 million. As you've already referenced, Deputy, yourself, an additional €45 million has been ring-fenced to support employers meet the costs of further increases to the minimum rates of pay and is contingent on updated employment regulation orders. As I've already said, I've met recently with the Labour Committee representatives to acknowledge the Committee's important role and work and to outline the Government's continued support for the sector as a whole, and as outlined in the programme for government for the entire Joint Labour Committee process. I outlined to the representatives, as I've reiterated, that Government expects the funding secured to support the cost of increased minimum pay rates is used for its intended purpose. And that's the absolute clarity. The money is ring-fenced, it should be used for the intended purpose, and that any new employment regulation orders would utilise the amount in its entirety. Data available to the Department shows previous employment regulation orders do not absorb the available core funding signalled for staff pay and graduate leaders. The level of pay for staff in the sector does not reflect the value of the work that has been done by the employees for children, for families and indeed for society and the wider economy. Therefore, it is hugely important that the Committee engage in productive negotiations about ensuring that the high level of investment being made through core funding for improved pay is maximised, and I look forward to the outcome of the Joint Labour Committee. Thank you.
Deputy.
Thank you, Minister, and I appreciate your comments and clarification and confirmation that the money is ring-fenced. But would you agree that for children to achieve their full potential, they need opportunities for care and education? And the key to ensuring the availability of these opportunities is the retention of qualified staff and early educators in the childcare sector. And key to this is increased rates of pay for the staff. Reports at the talks on the Employment Regulation Order, which is necessary to implement the increased rates of pay, have stalled. They are concerning both for those employed in the sector and in particular for those parents across the country, many of whom I've met over the last number of weeks in my own constituency of Carlow Kilkenny. I would encourage you, Minister, to do absolutely everything you can to support every single stakeholder to reach an agreement, as well as to ensure that the full amount of €45 million that was allocated under Budget 2025 is used in full for its intended purposes, as you said, that's going to support the costs of increased pay rates.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And look, I absolutely agree with you. It is to everyone's benefit, most especially the children, that we have suitably remunerated staff and suitably qualified staff. And that is the purpose of specifically ring-fencing the funding this year. And as I've already said, it is my absolute desire that it would be used in full for that purpose. I also want to acknowledge that there is significant work also underway to support those who might wish to enhance their qualifications through the Nurture Skills programme, where opportunities are being given, where 90% of the costs are being covered for those who might wish to move forward towards a level 7 or a level 8. It's currently been piloted. There's been a great uptake on it, and we look forward to another successful year of it this year. I also want to acknowledge specifically in terms of retention, the Early Learning and Childcare Stakeholder Forum now has a subgroup on recruitment and retention, looking at a whole variety of issues, and chief amongst them, of course, is the issue of pay, but also looking at other issues that would provide support right across the sector.
Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. And I suppose finally I'd just like to ask the Minister what impact she foresees if her department is prevented from passing on the pay increase to childcare staff. I know the money is ring-fenced, but if it's not, you're not in a position to do it, what impacts would that have? And more importantly, would it be unlikely that future budgets would provide for pay increases in the sector? 45 million in 2025 is fantastic, but if we can't get that allocated, what impact is that going to have on future budgets? And I suppose to ensure that every child has the best possible start in life, we must guarantee the availability of affordable, accessible childcare to all families. I'm hearing it week in, week out. I welcome your comments earlier that the ambition is to have a cap of €200 childcare for all families across the country. That's absolutely to be welcomed. But finally, implementation of the increased pay rates is absolutely essential for building capacity in the sector. We need this 45 million allocated to support further increases to the minimum rates of pay for the childcare sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. Look, I do agree with you. I think there's unanimity here around that 45 million and how it should be spent and spent in full. I would have to say that if the Joint Labour Committee is unable to agree new, I suppose, employment regulation order for the start of the 25-26 year, the ring-fenced 45 million will not be made available at the start of the year either. That's the purpose of it. So I would be very hopeful, and it would be my wish that everything would be done in advance of the 25-26 year. Obviously, it's a win-win situation for everyone. If the children are being cared for by those who are suitably recompensed and have the qualifications that are required, it's a win for the children, for the parents, and indeed for the providers. I do want to say as well that every year since core funding was introduced, we have seen an increase in actual fact of those who are in this market now, but we're also in the process I mentioned earlier where there is a lack of availability. A body of work has been done there so as to allow the state to step in where necessary.
Thank you, Minister. Now we move to other questions and we go to question 89, Deputy Shane Moynihan.
Minister, as a dad of 3 in a constituency that's got some of the fastest growing communities in the country, childcare and the services that underpin our childcare system are crucial to many of the working families. My question for you today, Minister, is with regard to the planned review of core funding, the time frame for that to be rolled out, the process that it will underpin it, and to give the certainty to a number of providers who at this stage, so I'm inundated with emails, that are starting to leave the childcare system because of the financial pressure they're under.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and I know this is of particular interest to yourself, and you've raised it many times. Look, I want to say at the outset, as I said previously, the introduction of core funding in 2022 brought a significant increase in investment for the sector, with 259 million of funding paid directly to services in year one of the scheme, of which €210.8 million was entirely new funding. Since the scheme was introduced, its effectiveness has been subject to ongoing review, and the scheme itself has evolved year on year. Core funding increased by 11% to reach 287 million for the second year, and by a further 15% so as to reach 331 million for the current and third year of the scheme. The allocation of this additional funding in year 2 and 3 was informed by the data from previous years, feedback from stakeholders, as well as an independent financial review of sessional services by Frontier Economics. Targeted supports for small and sessional services introduced in year 2 were enhanced also in year 3. Moreover, changes to fee management were introduced in year 3, enabling low-fee services to apply for a fee increase. The full-year allocation for year 4 of core funding will be €350 million. A further 45 million, as has already been referenced, has been ring-fenced to support employers to meet the costs of further increases to the minimum rates of pay in the sector. Combined and contingent on the third successive employment regulation orders, the core funding allocation will exceed €390 million. It's unprecedented investment by the state. The details of the allocation will be published shortly and has been informed by data from previous years as well as stakeholder feedback. An evaluation of the first year of core funding and the development of an evaluation framework for core funding is currently underway. This project will examine the early implementation of core funding and make recommendations for further evaluations of the grant. Findings from the project are expected in or after quarter 4 of 2025. This project has been undertaken by Irish Government Economic and Evaluation Services, or IGEES, policy analysts working in the Research and Evaluation Unit of the Department.
Deputy Moynihan.
Thank you, Gerlach, and thank you, Minister, for that response. And without doubt, I welcome the huge progress that has been made in bringing back down the cost of childcare. It was certainly raised with me by parents throughout the campaign, and we're keen to maintain and see that progress persist over the lifetime of this government, and to achieve that aim of a cap of €200 in childcare costs for every family in the state. I think the trick with core funding, and I fully understand the challenges about getting the balance right for parents, but also getting the balance right for providers. There have been 1 or 2 providers in my constituency that have withdrawn from the core funding model, and what they've told me is that the financial pressure they're under is very, very real. I acknowledge the progress that has been made with regard to issues like pay and so on, but I would ask that the evaluations that will be undertaken by the IGES and other bodies will feed into that planned review, and we give certainty to the provider side of the sector to ensure that they can then give certainty to the parents that rely on their services as well.
Minister.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. And look, I do want to say, as I've said previously, almost €1 billion of investment by the state into this whole sector. It's unprecedented. It has never been done before. And again, it has had a significant impact, both in terms of supporting providers, but also reducing costs for parents. And I also want to say that we are seeing more services opening now than we are actually seeing closing, which is a significant feature of a consequence of core funding. In fact, 92% of all providers are in the core funding model. It's very, very high. And as a consequence of that, we've seen fee freezes in a majority of services. We've seen a stability of funding for providers, which is hugely important to them. And again, as I've said, with the lowest level of closures in 6 years. So it's quite significant in that respect. But there is more work to be done here. I hear from engagement with providers that there is issues for them around the amount of administrative burden that's placed on them, so we're doing a body of work around that, whilst also supporting parents and the workers in the sector.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I do hugely recognise the huge progress that has been made in giving stability to that sector and shoring it up, and that public investment is extremely welcome, not only because of the relief it gives for working parents, but also ensuring full participation in the labour market for both men and women, that they don't have to worry about the cost of childcare. I would say that one of the hallmarks of how core funding has been improved over the last 4 years, which has been very positive, and I'm keen for it to continue, is that engagement between your department and parents and providers. That parents who have rightly seen the great progress we've made in reducing the cost of childcare aren't necessarily left with a provider who will exit the core funding scheme. So not necessarily that they would close, but they would exit the core funding scheme. So I think that review that you have alluded to is really important. I look forward to seeing the results of the evaluation, and also very much welcome your clarification today that there's a body of work being done on the administrative burden that are being faced on childcare providers, which I think, compared to your previous portfolio in schools and so on, there's a bit of difference there in how much administrative work is required of childcare providers versus schools as well. So thanks for your response.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I can't and I won't underestimate how important it is that we would get this right, but I'm also very conscious that it is, an evolving and I suppose living situation. Things change and move with times, and from every step of the way of the introduction of core funding, there have been learnings, notwithstanding the fact that there is a significant, I suppose, evaluation of the first year of core funding, how this evaluation will examine the early implementation of core funding and make recommendations for, I suppose, future changes and additions that we might be able to make for the grant. And as I said, the findings of that were in and around the first quarter or thereafter of 25. I think you make a very, very strong point around that, where there is a sufficiency of childcare, it ensures that we have equality of access also to the labour market, and I don't think we should forget that. So it's a worthwhile investment. So there is more to be done, but the work is well underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now we go to question 90, Deputy Cullen Burke.
Thank you very much. To ask Minister to confirm the staff retention rates among early years educators for the past 5 years, the actions being taken to improve staff retention in the sector, and if she will make a statement on the matter.
Thanks very much, Deputy. The annual early years sector profile survey does not collate staff retention data specifically. However, it does record data on staff turnover. Data from this survey shows that over the period of 2019 to 2023, staff turnover rates ranged from 23% in 2019 to 24.5% in 2023. The 2023 data shows that almost 1/3 of the turnover rate is due to staff moving from one provider to another. So 1/3 of staff going from one provider to another. Staff turnover is linked to pay and working conditions. While government is the primary funder of the sector, the state is not an employer of staff, and neither I nor the department, as I've said previously, set pay or working conditions. The Joint Labour Committee process is the formal mechanism by which employer and employee representatives can negotiate minimum pay rates for the sector, which are set down in law through employment regulation orders. Outcomes from the Joint Labour Committee process are supported by government through core funding, which has seen its allocation increase from €259 million in year one to €350 million for the coming programme year of 2025 to 26. An additional €45 million, as many deputies have referred to, is now ring-fenced in the coming year to support employers meet the cost of further increases to the minimum rates of pay, and this allocation is conditional on updated employment regulation orders. Officials from my department continue to discuss issues of recruitment and retention with stakeholders through a subgroup of the Early Learning and Childcare Stakeholder Forum. The general consensus of the subgroup is that pay and working conditions are a significant barrier for recruitment and retention. In addition to ring-fenced funding to support improvements in pay and working conditions, some outcome actions from the subgroup include the importance of introducing the student fast-track process for recognition of studies to work in services out of term, the assessment of unfinished qualifications where people who may have started a relevant qualification but did not finish it can have can have their qualifications completed.
Thank you, Deputy Burke.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I very much appreciate that there is additional funding going into this area, but it's interesting to see that the vast majority of services reported are having difficulty to recruit staff over the last 12 months. A process that was reported as difficult or very difficult by 95% of managers. The challenges of recruiting and retaining staff are having stark consequences. 30% of managers reported that problems recruiting and retaining staff will result in service closure, an increase of 6% over the previous year's survey, and the threat of room closures was reported by 42% of managers, an increase of 9% from 2022. So there is a challenge there, and it's about trying to meet that challenge with the demands that are out there and in relation to the provision of the service. So I think this needs to continue to be reviewed, but in particular planning for the year forward and into 2026, we need to make sure we have a substantially increase in funding over the next 12 months.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And again, just to confirm, there is a significant increase in funding from a core funding point of view. It's going to €350 million for the 25-26 year, which is just a hugely significant figure of resource being provided for by the state. And also, I can just say, as I've said to you previously, 92% of providers are participating in the core funding model. And in its entirety, if you look at the last 3 years and going into this following year, it's just almost €1 billion being expended by the state here. And that's a real surety for providers that funding has been made available. And it's important to say that when we talk about closures and the threat of closures, it's at the lowest level of closures ever in the system over the past 6 years. But you are 100% correct. The most important thing here is to ensure that those who work in the sector are suitably recompensed for working in the sector, because if we don't have the workers, the providers can't provide the service and parents can't ensure that their children are being cared for.
Deputy Burke.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I fully agree that there is a lot of work being done, a lot of improvements have occurred. The other area where there's a challenge in relation to the early childcare is access to appropriate facilities, and it's something I think that we need to work together with, not only in your department but across other government departments as regards access to facilities. I've come across a number of facilities which have difficulty or where they've difficulty in getting access to facilities, and therefore the service cannot be provided in particular areas. And I think we need to do a lot more work on that, especially in new housing areas where developers are slowing up in relation to the provision of facilities, or there's no one available to come in to provide those facilities. So it's not only a staff challenge, but it's also a challenge in relation to facilities itself, and that is something that we will face. It will be a more difficult challenge because of costs having increased over the last number of years.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. It is important that there is now within the department this forward planning unit to ensure that we are looking towards the future to see where there are very significant gaps in terms of the need for the service and the lack of the service being provided. And government has given the commitment in the programme for government that where that gap might be in place and there are no providers taking the opportunity to provide the service, that the state will step in. There's currently a mapping tool being utilised by the department and being developed by the department to ensure that we have the most up-to-date information in relation to that. One last point, just in terms also of ensuring that the workforce are suitably upskilled as well. The Nurturing Skills programme is a very, very important source, I suppose, of support for workers in that respect as well, and been significant uptake in terms of whether it's professional development or whether it's ensuring that people can move to level 7 and level 8 qualifications, and funding be provided for same.
Now we're moving to question 91, and I believe Deputy Curran is taking that for Deputy Bennett.
Thank you. Minister, I want to ask you in terms of the cost of childcare, which remains very high for an awful lot of parents and families out there, the commitment in the programme for government to reduce the cost of childcare. How, Minister, do you intend to go about this, and have you a time frame in mind to reduce the cost for families? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Deputy. Investment in early learning and childcare is now at an unprecedented level, with public funding exceeding €1.37 billion in 25, clearly demonstrating the government's commitment in this very specific area. As well as addressing affordability, this investment has served to improve accessibility, availability and the quality of provision. The new programme for government provides the impetus to go further and to deliver more high-quality early learning and childcare places at a cost that is affordable to families. It will build on the considerable work done to date, including the Early Childhood Care and Education programme, which provides 2 years of preschool without charge and enjoys a participation rate of 96% each year. The National Childcare Scheme, which provides subsidies, both universal and targeted, to reduce the costs to parents for children to participate in early learning and childcare. The National Childcare Scheme has already seen the extension of the universal subsidy to all children under 15 years of age and 2 increases to the minimum hourly subsidy in recent years. The minimum subsidy is now worth €96.20 per child per week for 45 hours of early learning and childcare. The fee management system through the core funding is ensuring that the investment in affordability is not unnecessarily absorbed by fee increases or uncapped fees. The programme for government commits to continuing to improve affordability and to reach €200 per month cap within the lifetime of the government. In addition, a forward planning model, as I've already referenced, is in development, which will be central to the department's plans to achieve the policy goals to build an affordable, high quality, accessible early learning and childcare system with state-led facilities adding capacity. Officials are currently developing a mapping tool using administrative data on schemes and population location to identify areas where supply and demand are mismatched and where those mismatches are greatest. And also, very importantly, the voice of parents. An Ipsos poll to parents will also inform future planning of the department, and this will enable the state to step in where it is necessary for the state to step in.
Deputy Cran.
Thank you, Minister. And I wonder, would you envisage that you will use the National Childcare Scheme, that you will invest more in that in order to bring the cost down directly for parents? That is what we had proposed in relation to our €10 a day plan, which is around €200 a month. It is using what is there, the current mechanism, as being the quickest way to bring down the cost of childcare. Because while the government repeatedly tell us that childcare costs have halved, we still have families that are paying well over €1,000 a month for childcare, and parents that are really struggling to cover the costs. You've mentioned accessibility, and of course accessibility is just as important as affordability, because it's fine if you can afford it, but you have to be able to access it in the first place. We know Pobble have told us there's 33,000 children on waiting lists for childcare places, many of them that frankly just do not exist. So we need to look at quick ways in which we can bring the cost down, and quick ways in terms of growing the number of places available. So is it through the National Childcare Scheme that you will look to reduce those costs as you have to date?
Thanks very much, Deputy. And you are 100% correct. Accessibility is hugely important. If we don't have a sufficiency of places available, to parents, then that is that is a huge burden. So we are currently looking at, as I've said previously, seeking the information where there is a need for the service and the service is not available locally. And it is at that point government is currently looking at ways in which the state can step in to provide those additional places. And those places would enhance what's already been provided by private providers, but it would provide additionality led by the state. Secondly, in terms of the monies and resources, just to say that currently 92% of providers are in the core funding mechanism or the core funding process, and that has helped to reduce costs for parents, where on average it is a substantial reduction for parents. So we have more than 4,400 providers who are currently in the system. However,
Thank you, Minister. And just to mention as well, in terms of our own proposal we brought forward on the 200 per month, we were also looking at, in terms of using the National Childcare Scheme and expanding that to childminders, and I think that would really assist in terms of building capacity in the sector, because for a lot of parents the choice is no longer there. If they want to get the subsidy, if they need help in affording childcare, they have to look to the formal setting, whereas I think particularly in rural areas a local childminder might actually suit the person, particularly if they're doing shift work or whatever it may be. So I do think that we should look to expand the NCS to childminders. I think that will give greater choice to parents, and it would widely improve capacity and build capacity, which is really badly needed. I asked your predecessor in relation to Social Enterprise Ireland. They had some really good ideas in terms of using existing buildings as community hubs and having the childcare element. There's some really good examples. There's one in Donegal. They have the after-school activities, they have the creche, they have the after-school, they have music, they have sports, all under one roof. And I think things like that should be looked at.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I do agree that we should have an opportunity to look at the widest, offering that might be available already within a community, and that includes, I think, we also have a body of work to do where there are new housing developments and where provision should be made, and currently is being asked to be made for childcare facilities, but that's not always the case. In some areas it works really, really well, but I'd honestly have to say that in other areas it doesn't work well, and I think a significant body of work needs to be done there, and we are engaging with the Department of Housing in relation to that as well. But you are right, wherever there is opportunity for a building to be in an area and an integrated service, I can see the value of that as well. In terms of childminders, I just want to say they all now have an opportunity to register and to become part of that registration, and I think that would be important as well. And we would encourage childminders to do just that. Look, I come from a rural constituency myself, so I absolutely understand the value and the importance of childminders also.
Now we move to question 92, Deputy Wall.
To ask the Minister for Children to provide the number of access and inclusion model childcare places provided since 2020 by county in tabular form, the actions she's taken to increase places, and if she'll make a statement on the matter.
Thanks very much, Deputy. The Access and Inclusion Model, or the AIM, has supported more than 24,000 children with additional needs to access and meaningfully participate in the Early Childhood Care and Education, or the ECHE programme, since 2020. In September of 24, AIM was expanded beyond time spent in the ECHE programme for ECHE-aged children. These children can now access AIM supports for up to an additional 3 hours per day during an ECHE term and up to 6 hours per day outside of the ECHE term during holiday periods. The supports are available under AIM can be universal, or they can actually be targeted supports. Universal supports are designed to create a more inclusive culture in settings through training courses and qualifications for staff. Where universal supports are not enough to meet the needs of an individual child, targeted supports are available. These targeted supports are allocated based on the individual child's specific needs, and can include things like specialised equipment, appliances or capital grants towards minor building alterations. Under Level 7 of the Access and Inclusion Model, services can also receive additional funding to either reduce the child-to-adult ratio in the room, or to find an extra staff member as a shared resource with other children in the setting. Data shows that approximately 96% of AIM Level 7 applications result in a recommendation for either a single or shared support. For this programme year to date, more than 9,000 children have been approved for targeted supports under AIM. A table showing a breakdown of targeted supports across counties, broken down by each programme year, will be made available to the Deputy, and I'll ensure that's made available to the Deputy. It's intended that over time, all children with additional needs will have access to supports under AIM to access and participate in early learning and childcare. To this end, officials are currently designing tailored AIM supports for younger children not yet eligible for the ECHE programme.
Minister, Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that, and if that could be shared with my colleague Deputy Wall as well, that would be great. Minister, the AIM itself for early childhood care, of course, is extremely important, and we see it in every facet of education now. Ultimately, special educational needs and the resourcing of special educational needs, and you know that from your previous department as well, is just so necessary, and to provide those. And I suppose the issue of maintaining AIM as well will come back to the financial constraints in terms of Level 7. And trying to get people into Level 7 courses to provide, as you said, universal support, targeted support. And I know at the end of Year 3, the evaluation report outlined that less visible disabilities, speech and language, autism spectrum, were ones that they were trying to particularly work on and trying to encourage families and those students in. So I would appreciate, as you said, if you could share that information with Deputy Wall.
For sure, Deputy, I will. And look, I think it's a great model. I think any additional supports in any setting in terms of education that can be applied and made available to a child should be made available. And as I've previously said in relation to the AIM supports, there is a flexibility about the model that is an important one, that it can be a targeted support or it can be universal support. and, you know, targeted measures really are very much so based on the individual needs of a child, and that might be in relation to, you know, as I've said, you know, specialised equipment or appliances, or it can in actual fact be a capital grant to make minor alterations. But also then, as I said, you know, there can be supports which would reduce the adult student or child ratio in the room, or an extra staff member to be shared as a resource as well. So there is a huge flexibility there as well. But I also want to reiterate that we're intent to go beyond what's there presently, and to ensure that we could design a model for younger children who aren't yet eligible for the ECHE programme. I think that would be a positive step forward also.
Thank you, Minister. That's really to be welcomed. And as you said there, just very briefly, I want to touch on enhancing the settings and the access to the settings itself, and perhaps capitation grants, like you've mentioned there, for aim to be able to access, as you said, if we're going to try and go to more targeted supports for children with less visible disabilities, as I said, children who are on the autism spectrum, speech and language, and other different less visible disabilities, targeted supports and capitation grants for enhancing the settings access as well, which would be much needed. But your reply there is very much welcomed.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. Look, I think, as I've said previously, we all know that at the earlier point that a child can get additional support, then the better the outcome, and we know that from, you know, our present education settings, and now when we talk about early learning and support in that as well, the earlier and earlier that we can provide the support. So that's the very specific reason why we're looking at you know, going beyond the ECHE model where children haven't reached that point yet. The beauty of the AIM model is that it's shown itself to be flexible, and, you know, that we're continually learning through the model, and where there's opportunity to do things better or to enhance or whatever, or meet the individual needs of a child. That is the absolute aim and ambition of the programme as well. So we will continue to keep it, I suppose, under review and see what the scope is going forward. But again, I think it's speaking to this understanding that we have that the earlier a child has access to additional support, then the better it is for the child, and I'm keen to see this new model take root as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now we go to question 93, Deputy Tubin.
Minister, a series of documents and emails that were exchanged between yourself and the CEO of TUSLA have been released to me under Freedom of Information, and they paint a very, very bleak picture of what's happening with the welfare of children in state care at the moment. How many children in care have been reported to have been sexually abused in recent years?
Thanks very much, Deputy. TUSLA, as you are aware, responds to all reports of sexual abuse promptly to ensure children are safeguarded. A child abuse notification is reported to An Garda Síochána in line with the joint working protocol between An Garda Síochána and TUSLA. An Garda Síochána will deal with any criminal aspects of cases alleging abuse under the relevant criminal justice legislation. All allegations of child abuse are responded to, ensuring the safety and welfare needs of identified children who may be at risk of potential harm are protected. Where applicable, a child abuse substantiation procedure investigation will be undertaken to determine whether an allegation of child abuse is founded or unfounded. More broadly, Children First provides national guidance for professionals, for organisations and individuals to help keep all children safe and protected from harm, including sexual abuse. The Children First Act of 2015 provides in detail a number of key child protection measures, including raising awareness of child abuse and neglect, providing for mandated reporting of child protection concerns, and improving child protection arrangements in organisations providing services to children. When children in care disclose sexual abuse and their immediate safety has been secured, the child will be referred to the most appropriate service where their need can be met. TUSLA has provided data on the number of children who have been admitted to care in the past 10 years, as per your question, where the report type as assessed by a social worker was sexual abuse. Over the 10-year period in question, there have been 221 admissions to care out of a total of 11,183 where sexual abuse has been reported. Regarding this figure, there may be incidences where a child has been admitted to care more than once. The Department can provide you with a table containing the full year-by-year breakdown. Other reasons for admitting a child into care can relate to neglect, ill treatment or other types of abuse such as physical abuse. Separately, since 2021, 115 referrals have been made by Tusla to An Garda Síochána under Operation Cosmium, an operation set up by An Garda Síochána for the investigation of child sexual exploitation.
So there's 221 cases of sexual abuse reported of children in state care in the last 10 years. That's a very dark figure, Minister. The other information that I've received shows at the moment that there are 37 children missing from Tusla care at the moment, which is a disastrous situation. Since 2021, Tusla have made referrals of 161 children to Gardaí who are suspected of being victims of child sexual exploitation. 115 of these children were in care and 46 were known to Tusla. Since 2014, Minister, 235 children have either died in state care or known to state care. 10 of these children were murdered and 51 of them died because of suicide or drug overdoses. These are shocking figures again. Now, the reliance of Tusla on special emergency accommodation is incredible. And we know that companies to whom Tusla have paid millions of euros have actually falsified documents in terms of verification. I would like you to answer, if you can, Minister. At present, are you sure that 100% of people working in SEAs at the moment are Garda vetted?
Minister, thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Just to be clear, that over the 10-year period, which was part of your question, there have been, as you've said, 221 admissions, as I have confirmed, 221 admissions to care, out of a total of 11,183 where sexual abuse has been reported. So these were admissions to care. Out of a total of 11,183, 221 admissions to care where sexual abuse was reported. Regarding the figure, there may be instances where a child has been admitted to care more than once, and the Department, as I've said, is happy to provide you with a table containing the full year-by-year breakdown. As regards, children missing from care, these children can fall under two categories: children who go missing from mainstream services for children in the care of Tusla, and those children who are separated children seeking international protection. Missing children is predominantly a phenomenon involving separated children seeking international protection, and in particular in relation to the children who remain unaccounted for, with 99% of non...
Thank you, Minister. Deputy.
It's a pity we have so little time, Minister, because there actually is so many important things here for both of us to discuss. But I just want to refer quickly, if I can, to the story in the RTE today in relation to the Grace report. And that particular story in RTE stated that if legal officials responsible for the affairs of the woman known as Grace claims that extensive submissions made by the Commission by lawyers representing the woman were not included or referred to in any way in the Commission's final report. Minister, you must be deeply frustrated, like everybody else, if that is the case. How can it be justified that solicitors who were the voice of Grace were silenced by the Commission in its final report? There are other cases as well, just that the National Independent Review Panel are actually looking at 5 other cases: the Brandon report in Donegal, the Carey report as well of a 17-year-old girl who died by suicide. When will these particular reports be published? We really need to get to grips with what's happening in our care system in this country.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Look, specifically in relation to the question you raised around Grace and the Commission of Investigation, I would have to say the Commission of Investigation, which was into certain matters relative to disability service in South East and other related matters, and is known as the Farrelly Commission, is an entirely independent statutory commission of investigation empowered to investigate matters of significant public concern. It possesses robust investigative powers, and by design and by law, exercises its functions and powers independently of the government, independently of me as Minister, and indeed independently of my department, and that is as it was set out. The General Solicitor, as you've referred to, for minors and wards of court, who is the High Court appointed Committee for Grace, made information available into the public domain today, and I can confirm to you that I am meeting with the General Solicitor for Minors and Wards of Court, really to hear what it is that she has to say. It is hugely concerning, there's no doubt.
Thank you, Minister. Now we move to question 94. Deputy Grace Boland.
Minister, as a very proud TD for Dublin Fingal West, one of the youngest constituencies in the country, I cannot understate the demand for childcare. And as a mum of 8-year-old twins who has never been able to access childcare, the delivery of additional childcare places is an absolute priority of mine, and I really hope it is of this government. You might please give us an update as to the uptake of the public building block scheme to deliver more childcare places, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy. The Building Blocks Extension Grant Scheme is designed to increase the number of full-day places for 1 to 3-year-olds pre-ECHE age range by existing core funding partner services. €25 million has been made available, and it is anticipated to deliver a significant increase in places for this age cohort. The Building Blocks Extension Grant Scheme is offering the largest capital grants in many years and allows, for the first time since the National Childcare Investment Programme, for the purchase or construction of new facilities to be operated by existing community providers. Up to €750,000 is available to not-for-profit providers wishing to purchase or construct new premises delivering net additional capacity. The scheme has 4 strands: extensions to existing premises for private services, extensions to existing premises for community services, purchase of new premises for community services, and construction of new premises for community services. The Building Blocks Extension Grant Scheme was launched on the 4th of November of 24. The closing date for applications was 30th of January. A total of 78 applications were received: 4 purchasing applications, 16 private extension applications, 22 construction applications and 36 community extension applications. These applications come from a variety of locations right across the country. Initial eligibility reviews, a full appraisal process and further suitability checks have been undertaken in relation to each of these applications. The OPW and PUBL completed appraisals of eligible applications against 3 criteria, and the criteria were evidence of need, quality of application and readiness to progress the project, and the scores in these criteria have been collated. A list of recommended services is currently under review, with further detail being examined in some cases, and I do expect to announce the outcome of the appraisals and the next steps of the process quite imminently.
Thank you, Deputy Bowden.
Thank you, Minister. And while I do welcome the PUBL scheme, 78 applications is not a lot. 78 additional childcare facilities, or not even childcare facilities, is absolutely not sufficient for the demand we need in Ireland, and it is certainly not going to do anything to meet the demands of people in Dublin, Fingal West. Can I ask you, Minister, seriously to look for more funding to support childcare providers in areas of high demand? And as I said, I cannot understate the demand in Balbriggan, Skerries, Rush and Lusk. It is one of the youngest constituencies in Ireland. Balbriggan is the youngest large town, and we need to be doing everything we can to support more childcare providers. Fingal is littered with empty sites that are supposed to be childcare facilities, and we need to do everything as a government to make sure that they are delivered. And I very much hope that childcare is a priority of this government. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I do want to assure you childcare is and early learning is an absolute priority of this government. And the Building Blocks Extension Grant Scheme is an important part of that. I do appreciate, 25 million is 25 million, but the 78 applications were just the applications. There wasn't an impediment in saying we'll only take X number. That was what we received, and it is an important, as I said, up to €750,000 being available to not-for-profit providers wishing to purchase or construct a new premises delivering net additional capacity. Is a significant volume of money. But you are right about the number of properties that are around the place that are empty and were designated when they were being built to support housing developments and are not being used as childcare facilities. There is an issue with that. Now, it's working beautifully in some parts of the country, but I am well aware myself where it's not working. And I am currently, and we're engaging with the Minister for Housing in relation to that, and particularly in relation to the planning guidelines and what we expect going forward in relation to provision for childcare.
Thank you, Minister, and that's very welcome news. If the 78 applications do not take up the 25 million, I would ask you to urgently reopen the scheme. 7 weeks was not a very long window for childcare providers to make applications to the scheme, so I'd very much like you to look at reopening it if it is not all utilised. But in addition to that, I would very much appreciate looking for additional funding. We really need to prioritise areas like my own, Skerries, Balbriggan, Rush and Lusk, and do everything we can to provide more childcare facilities in these areas. We are not just doing families and women and parents a disservice, it is also an economic loss to the Irish economy. Female participation over the last 40 years has really driven the success of the Irish economy. Our best resource is our highly educated women and men, and if we do not have childcare for them, we are failing ourselves as an economy, as well as parents and children who are unbelievably stressed by not having access to childcare. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and to be fair, I think you've put it very eloquently and very succinctly. Look, access to childcare and early learning opportunities is hugely important, and Government does recognise that. And in terms of our commitment, I do want to say that, you know, the capital funding for the present scheme of building blocks extension is required to be spent in this calendar year, and the Department does not currently have any further funding available for additional capital schemes this year. However, the approach to capital investment in future years is being considered within the context of the Programme for Government Commitments, and they are considerable when it comes to this area. And for the first time, the Programme for Government also contains a commitment to public provision and to capital investment to build or purchase state-owned facilities. Some early work is being carried out to explore options to introduce a segment of public provision, and this will require significantly detailed policy development and design in order to progress and implement this programme. The Programme for Government Commitments will inform the Department's contribution to the upcoming review of the National Development Plan, which will set out capital allocations for future years also. Thank you.
Minister. Now we move to question 95, Deputy Tubing.
Minister, in recent days I've received significant information that there is an independent review of Children's Disability Network's team service model. Now, it's been obvious to most people that this system is completely broken around the country. So would you today, Minister, just confirm that, to the Dáil, that the entire CDNT service model is currently being independently reviewed?
Thank you, Deputy. As I stated to Deputy O'Murricu, the CDNT team's workforce survey was conducted last October, and that captured staffing levels across various disciplines and grades, providing a snapshot of the current workforce across the 93 teams. So that 2024 CDNT team workforce report, it's based on the outputs of the survey. So the published report shows that all 6 regional health areas were carrying vacancies at mid-October, and there's a wide disparity in vacancy levels across the country, with the highest levels in Dublin and South East region and the lowest levels in the Midwest region. And separately, the HSE have advised me that the majority of CDNTs are currently carrying vacancies, with 4 teams having no vacancies at present. So the HSE is currently using this data from that report to support focused recruitment and retention initiatives in the areas with the highest vacancy rates, and taking the learnings and related actions from areas with lower levels of vacancies. And while the vacancy rate remains high, there's been an increase by 17% in 2024 when compared to 2023. And there has been a reduction rate, reduced from 29% to 22%. As you know, in Budget 2025, my department secured 2.84 million in new development measure funding to provide additional 40 health and social care professionals, comprising 20 senior, 20 staff grade therapists, 20 therapy assistants, 15 clinical psychology trainee placements. So there is a dedicated disability workforce strategy that is going to be developed this year to meet the growing service demands and address recruitment and retention challenges. And also under the Disability Action Plan, we have the Progressing Disability Services Roadmap, and that sets out measures as well designed to attract and retain staff in CDNTs, and I can outline those later.
So my information indicates that the independent review is being commenced by the National Disability Authority. Maybe you might just confirm in your answer if that's the case. Now, the figures that I've seen in relation to what's happening in the CDNT, Minister, are absolutely shocking. Unbelievable. In 2023, there were 817 vacancies across CDNTs across the country. In CH01, there's been a drop-off of 22% in therapy hours in the space of a year. 44% of CDNT posts in the HSE are currently vacant at the moment. 43% of psychologist posts are currently vacant at the moment, and that's 62% in CH01 and 59% in CH05. That is a failure in a monumental scale when you're seeing that the majority of those posts are actually empty. You know, in my own constituency, I've seen children waiting for 14 months to get onto CDNT, and some cases where children are being bounced between CAMS, CDNT, therapy services, without ever ending up on a waiting list at all. This, you have to agree, Minister, this is outrageous.
I agree that far more needs to be done in relation to retention and recruitment within the CDNT teams, and that is an absolute priority for my department. We have, under the Disability Action Plan and the Progressing Disability Services Roadmap, set out measures, and just to outline a few very briefly, we're supporting practice education in CDNTs, supporting student sponsorship programmes. There's an initiative where 4 years' salary is now paid to new graduates over 5 years to support them in taking a gap year in year 5. We are also developing apprenticeship programmes, and the HSE is driving a number of initiatives to address the CDNT vacancy rate, and that includes intensive recruitment efforts across the HSE, Section 38, 39 organisations. Also, we're engaging with secondary schools and higher education institutions to expose more students to the rewarding and that impactful work within CDNTs and within the disability sector overall. And also, we're working on, there's 7 now disciplines required for working within the CDNT teams, and that those 7 disciplines are included in the critical skills occupation list in DETI as well.
We're going to go to Deputy Tobin, and then we're going to go to Deputy O'Marco for a supplementary.
Good, Margaret. So I indicated the massive figures of absences and vacancies in the sector, but I just want to drill it down to what it means for an individual child. I've been contacted by a constituent who is a foster mother of a child who has worked tirelessly to help her young boy. The boy presents with significant complex behavioural problems and has been expelled from 2 preschools and 4 times from primary schools already, and he's currently on reduced school hours because of the situation, and he's falling back in his education massively. Despite urgent GP referrals to CAMS, he's facing a 14 to 18 month wait for an initial assessment, and in the meantime his condition is deteriorating and his education is severely disrupted. He's getting referrals to speech and language therapy, and other services have yielded nothing but long waiting times, and his GP believes that he needs immediate interventionist care. The foster mother, who's doing her utmost for this child, has contacted TUSLA, CAMS, disability services, social workers, private psychologists. Everywhere she turns at the moment, she is meeting delays. That's what those absences, those massive levels of vacancies mean to an individual child.
Now we go to Deputy O'Marco.
Minister, I would just like to restate the question that I asked earlier. And look, we all know there's a huge amount of vacancy, even if there has been improvements. Obviously, when this workforce report was carried out, it was 529, I think 0.72 whole-time equivalent positions. And we need to really ensure that is dealt with. But the question I have is, even if we fill those positions, does that mean that we have a CDNT system that is actually able to deliver for those that require the assessments, and then obviously the therapies that are meant to follow up that we know don't follow up at the minute? And we know that there's a huge amount of parents and schools that say, we don't know where to put your kid until the fact that you get an assessment. So this is a huge issue across the board, and unfortunately it feels sometimes like a broken clock in here.
Thank you,
Deputy just constantly repeating the same questions, but we need to get to a better place.
And look, I take both deputies' points on board, and it is an absolute priority. I came from special education Minister Foley, from Minister for Education, and we're now in the Department of Disability, we have a very clear picture around the need for more therapies, access to assessments, and that is at the forefront of the work that we're doing. We have a Cabinet Committee in relation to disability. You talk about therapies in schools. We're going to roll out that pilot now into all special schools and eventually into all special classes in mainstream schools as well. That will help in relation to children getting access to those therapies in the community. CDNTs, absolutely, we want that multidisciplinary approach as well, where children, if they need to get access to a dietitian, a physio, whatever outside, that they will have access to those therapies. What I can say is everything that can be done, and my door is open if there are suggestions in relation to recruitment. We're looking at therapy assistance, we're looking at pay and terms and conditions. That is underway as well, as you know, and we're looking at absolutely everything. And what I want to do as well as part of our National Disability Strategy, this is not just the Department of Disability, this is every single government department has disability in their brief, and I will be publishing that strategy before summer recess, and that's going to feed into this as well. But I absolutely just agree with what you've said here, Deputies. It's an absolute priority of mine as Minister sitting at the Cabinet table in relation to disability, but my door is open for suggestions as well, if you have any.
Thank you, Minister. Now we're moving to question 97, Deputy Nisha Murray.
Can I ask the Minister Anara about the steps being taken to develop a career path in the childcare sector in view of the high staff turnover rate, and if she makes a statement on the issue?
I acknowledge many early learning and childcare services report recruitment and retention challenges. In general, these challenges are not caused by insufficient supply of qualified staff, but by high levels of turnover. The most recent annual early years sector profile survey shows staff turnover is at 24.5%. It's estimated that, in fact, 1/3 of staff leaving services are doing so to move to another service. Staff turnover is linked to pay and working conditions. However, the state is not an employer of staff, and neither I nor the department set pay or working conditions. The Joint Labour Committee process is the formal mechanism by which employer and employee representatives can negotiate minimum pay rates for the sector. Outcomes from the Joint Labour Committee process are supported by government through core funding, which has seen its allocation increase from €259 million in year one to €350 million for the coming programme year of 2025-26. An additional €45 million, as I've referenced earlier in the debate, has been ring-fenced in the coming programme year to support employers meet the costs of further increases to minimum rates of pay, conditional on updated employment regulation orders. Staff in this sector play a key role in supporting children's development and well-being, working in partnership with families. Recognising their central importance for the quality of provision, my department continues to deliver on the workforce plan for the sector, the Nurturing Skills programme. Nurturing Skills aims to support the professional development of the workforce and sets out plans to raise the profile of careers in the sector, establish role profiles, career pathways, qualification requirements, along with leadership development opportunities. To support the development of career pathways, the role profiles of educator, lead educator and manager, which were set out in Nurturing Skills, were given legal meaning when used as the basis for the employer regulations order for the sector. These orders now embed a career structure by setting different rates of pay for the different roles. Further developing career pathways, both Nurturing Skills and Equal Start identify special posts of responsibility and other measures.
We heard earlier that childcare managers, 30% of them are struggling to retain or to find new staff. So would you consider adding childcare to the critical skills list, which would make it easier for that sector to attract skilled and qualified personnel, particularly obviously from outside the European Economic Area? So countries like New Zealand, Brazil, Australia would then qualify skilled people from those, obviously with the appropriate qualifications. And just, you mentioned there 20 to 25% staff turnover, and 1/3 of those going to other jobs within the sector, but that means it's 2/3 going elsewhere. Would you, and while the government isn't an employer, a direct employer, the government is policy maker in this area, would we consider a long-term sustainable career path for childcare staff with market rate pay as a policy, some sort of a pay scale, and ongoing training and career development in particular, because that's quite important when it comes to retaining these people, particularly those graduates? Thank you.
Just to say, the key issue that has been identified across the sector in terms of retention of staff is actually the financial reward that they get to do the work that they do. These are professionals who deserve to be paid at a rate that they should be paid, and it is for that reason that there's a ring-fenced 45 million being made available. I accept the independence of the Joint Labour Committee, but I am advocating and saying that 45 million is at disposal, is available, and I'd like to see that 45 million being used and utilised to the maximum for the workers, so they would be suitably paid. Notwithstanding, I fully respect the independence of the Joint Labour Committee.
Thank you, Minister. And that now concludes oral questions. We move to topic votes.
And Jerry, go.